You have been ill, very ill, and even the constant letters of dear kind Henry are not sufficient to reassure me on your account. You are forbidden to write, to hold a pen. Yet one word from you, dear Victor, is necessary to calm our apprehensions. For a long time I have thought that each post would bring this line, and my persuasions have restrained my uncle from undertaking a journey to Ingolstadt. One of the strange and emergent behaviors of short stories that you will notice if you pay close enough attention is that a lot of short stories contain somewhere within them some strange little paragraph that is basically a summary of the entire paragraph. You would be able to pluck that one paragraph out and basically just kind of understand what the entire short story was about. One of the strange and emergent properties of the novel as an art form that we get most often when someone doesn't have to work with an editor like Stephen King, who's going to tell Stephen King to take something out, or before the practice of editing was really a practice as known as it is today, or the emergence of chapters that are really kind of throwaway, at least to the naked eye. Sometimes those chapters do contain one thing, and the one thing those chapters will contain are the seed of an overarching symbol or theme for the novel. Is that what we have today? Or do we have a chapter that is kind of throwaway? Well, we will talk about that in today's video. Chapter 6 of Frankenstein from Mary Shelley. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another video in this series, which will contain 3 separate parts: a So What Happened recap of the novel, a literary criticism section where we talk about all of the literary goings-on and important stuff in this chapter as far as the novel is concerned, and 3, a writer's corner portion of this video where we talk about the lessons to be taken from this chapter of Frankenstein as writers ourselves. So, what happened? We open with a letter from Elizabeth. She's been worried, but hears Victor is getting better and hopes he will write back. The letter from Elizabeth includes so many stories of so many family members, you end up waiting to hear about Japheth. Victor starts to recover and goes about introducing Clerval to the professors. But even the sight of scientific apparatus triggers his monster mash PTSD, let alone the professors praising his scientific acumen. Oh, the horror. With his friend Clerval to keep him company, Victor becomes Victor again, not Frankenstein, not the mad scientist. He regains the humanity that he lost, or traded, in his pursuit of creating life. The first thing I want to talk about happens almost immediately in this chapter, and it's not really a criticism so much as it is just a funny thing to read. It is sort of a, if, I don't know, I'm just going to read it. So this is as Elizabeth is sort of going through the goings about of the household. She says, a servant in Geneva does not mean this. Oh, so they've got this servant girl who they've kind of adopted and is working her way through the house, all these things. A servant in Geneva does not mean the same thing as a servant in France and England. Justine, thus received in our family, learned the duties of a servant, a condition which, in our fortunate country, does not include the idea of ignorance and a sacrifice of the dignity of a human being. Almost immediately, in the next paragraph, we get this, quote, Justine was the most grateful creature in the world. So, not exactly a rebuke of her dignity as a human being, but calling someone a grateful creature, a grateful little creature, does not necessarily ring the most wholesome if we are talking about humanity. Now, I have but one more entry that I want to talk about from a specific contextual reference point, and then there's just some ideas that I think are worth talking about. And I like to bring these ideas up as we go through the read alongs, and then maybe if I can figure out something poignant enough, I will bring it back up in the book review at the end of this series. But on 67, when you read their writings, life appears to consist in a warm sun and a garden of roses, in the smiles and frowns of a fair enemy, and the fire that consumes your own heart. How different from the manly and heroical poetry of Greece and Rome. Here we have uh, Elizabeth, I believe it is, talking about how effeminate Eastern culture is. Or is this, no, this is Frankenstein, isn't it? I believe this is Victor talking about how effeminate sort of seeming Eastern culture, Eastern literature is versus how manly and heroic the poetry of Greece and Rome. This is from a female author. You can't get mad at me for talking about it. It's just in the text. I have nothing really to add to that discussion. I just thought that it was interesting to see in writing when we do not see these types of arguments made very much anymore. Now, here's the big idea, I think, in it's not necessarily in this chapter, it's just sort of emergent through the reading that we've had so far. Let's take a step back and reconceptualize the idea of the monster. The idea of the monster in this text. Let's take that and say, no, not a monster, that's a symbol. The monster in this text is a symbol for a scientific breakthrough that comes with negative consequences. Victor had secluded himself and become rigorous in his studies and in his practices. At the end of this venture, he had a scientific breakthrough, and that breakthrough had negative consequences. If we are to graft this onto history, it would be very easy to say that Victor, when secluded, was in his own personal Manhattan Project. Thus, the monster breakthrough and its implications are the creation and destruction of the bomb. In the same way that we can do that, we can just graft this onto some other part of history. Victor, locking himself in his room, secluding himself from his studies and his classmates and anyone that he might have met, is Mark Zuckerberg, locking himself up in his dorm room in order to pound out code for Facebook/social media. The monster which escaped his control. If we are to look forward, perhaps, and this is something that obviously this kind of has been done before and was done maybe most recently with the Marvel movies, Age of Ultron, though I suppose that was nearly a decade ago now, wasn't it? The monster, Frankenstein's monster, as artificial intelligence. The monster, the creation, the bomb, the algorithm that will get away from its creator. This is, it seems, a tale as old as scientific invention. This book is subtitled to do with Prometheus, the modern Prometheus. How long do you think it was before the people who discovered fire or invented artificial fire, I guess you could call it artificial fire, right? It was not naturally occurring, it was human made. How long do you think it was before the individual who created artificial fire had fire used against them, or his or her tribe? You know, uh, every breakthrough that you see in spear tip technology, every breakthrough that you see in, you ever heard of the atlatl? A weapon that I still don't particularly understand, that was apparently available to earlier hominids than Homo sapiens sapien. So, how long before those weapons were turned against their creator? In a way, you know, you create the brand new spear tip, and you pass on that technology to another tribe in exchange for their coat making technology. All of a sudden, that other tribe hunts you down in the winter. Is that not the same thing as the technology gaining its own intelligence? If we are to think of technologies and think of ideas, if we were to think of these things as the same thing as the natural occurring world, like parasites, a parasite latches on to another host in order to evolve. You teach that spear tip technology, that arrowhead technology to another tribe. They hunt you down and they kill you. That technology lives through them. And guess what? They're very crafty. Crafty enough to have gotten you. So, that technology lives on with a group of people that might just innovate it. This spear tip, this arrowhead has no mind of its own, but it is still evolving in the same way that, for example, the monster in this story has escaped its creator, that artificial intelligence will inevitably escape or surpass its creator. And when it does, it will have a mind of its own in the same way that those previous technologies have, just having had to use a host to evolve further. It is an interesting talking point to me because there is always the calm before the storm. The Manhattan Project, whereby hundreds of scientists, the brightest in the world, I don't know if it was really 100, I'm making that up maybe, very large amount of super intelligent people going away, disappearing, going into seclusion. Here we have Victor Frankenstein going into seclusion, becoming absolutely overrun with these ideas of grandeur, obsessed with these thoughts of the project itself. The next thing I want to talk about here, there's a couple, so obviously this book is wrought with religio-cultural implication. You're talking about perhaps reincarnation. You're talking about perhaps manifestation of life. We'll get into that a little bit later in the novel, but Victor created life. The monster came to life and looked at him, reached out for him, wanted to be with him, wanted to know him. And it creeped Victor out. So Victor ran. Is that what God did with the flood? Is there a parallel there, at least being pointed out in the text, that the Creator gets spooked and decides, not having it, bro.
Not me, not now. I got to get out. I got to cut out. Is that the same thing that God did with the great flood, kicking Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, with having to send his son to redeem humankind from himself because of rules he had set, right? If he is all powerful, he could have just those rules and restrictions out of existence. I'm not particularly instigating with this. I'm just saying these are ideas brought up by the text that are worth thinking about. And the last thing I want to talk about here, I don't think this idea had ever occurred to me before. I can't believe I have never considered this. So, you have Victor. Victor in this novel is, if there is ever a case in literature of someone quote unquote playing God, it's Victor Frankenstein, right? If ever there was a case of someone playing God, it's Victor Frankenstein. That's interesting, but it gets more interesting. The Buddha, if I am not mistaken, was born through a slit in his mother's side. Jesus, of course, in the texts, was a divine conception, an immaculate conception. There was no quote-unquote hanky-panky involved. There is, in many of these texts, a great sort of shirking of the sexual act, saying that someone who is pure has nothing to do with that inception. There is a term for the virgin birth, parthenogenesis, basically meaning that no hymens were harmed in the creation of this individual. Well, guess what? We have Victor playing God, don't we? This might be, I don't know why this has never occurred to me. And it probably makes me an idiot. I'm sure that this is 80% of the conversation with this novel. Frankenstein is not just born, is not just created the way that, for example, Adam is created, but Adam was created through parthenogenesis as well. Is there a stronger link between the monster and the Christ? You have a father, you have a son. I am not the most well-versed on the Bible, but I think that in Genesis, Adam is not seen sort of as a son, right? Am I wrong about that? Am I making that up? That he is the creation of God. He is the sort of the manifestation. But we have in the monster here the same sort of idea. There is, I think, however, a greater, just through memory, right? Just through what I remember about this novel, there is a greater, perhaps, argument to be made that Frankenstein, or the monster, is more like Christ than Adam. Adam just kind of sins, and Adam sins with his wife. There's a family unit there, and he is expelled from the Garden of Eden. The story of Christ is a story of individuality, much like the monster. The story of Christ is one of moral ambiguity, is one of doctrinal ambiguity. I think one could very easily argue that the sort of philosophical goings on for the monster in this novel are more closely akin to the philosophical wanderings, the philosophical teachings of Christ than anything that we get from Adam in the Bible. I do not have a particular stake to set in the ground with either of these arguments, with the fact that Victor is acting very much like Old Testament God, or that the monster is New Testament Christ. I have no particular stake to put in the ground for those, but I do want to say, as we move forward in this novel, those are things that are worth keeping an eye on. Two writer's notes from this chapter of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and the first one is this. So I have to be 1,000% honest, though I have read Frankenstein before. I don't remember which ones of these characters, if any of them mentioned in this section, come back to play a role in the novel. You got to think we're approaching the maybe 33% mark, so to be talking about as Elizabeth is in this section, all of these different characters doing all of these different things, not a whole lot of them are going to have an impact on the story. But there's two things that can happen there. So here's one of them. A few years ago, I had a coworker, and she was one of these people who, she was a cashier, and she just talked. Everybody all day long, talk to everybody. And it was difficult for me because I had to get the other stuff done, and I can't get the other stuff done if she has lines, and I got to be up there ringing people up too, all of these things. So I was trying to figure out how to explain this, right? Because the guise under which she kept defending her incessant need to talk to everyone about everything all the time, was that it was customer service. These people got in line and they waited to be rung up, and they enjoyed the conversation that they had with her and all of these things. And that was customer service. These people ended up leaving happy, right? And that was difficult for me to really disprove. And then I realized, look, customer service is only customer service insofar as it pertains to that individual, as they are a customer. If you were helping someone and talking to them about the fact that they want ibuprofen and they are trying to find ibuprofen, and you say, well, ibuprofen relieves swelling, that is customer service. If you come in and I ask you about your dog, not customer service. So I think right here in this chapter, we've got a lot of stories being passed on by Elizabeth which are extraneous to the overall overarching story that we have so far with Frankenstein. Maybe, right? So there's two things that can go on there. The first one is that same thing that I'm talking about. We have storytelling going on, but storytelling is only being a storyteller insofar as the story you're telling is the one that we're getting. So all of these side stories that we're getting here from Elizabeth, if they don't have a payoff in the novel, it's not storytelling, it's just rambling. But then it's not storytelling, it's just telling, right? You're only a storyteller insofar as the stories you're telling pertain to the story being told. Very difficult, in my opinion, to put that in different words than I have there. But if none of these characters and their goings-on reflect back on the novel that is Frankenstein in some way, then this is not storytelling. It's just telling. Second thing is this. We are delving into the world of literature. So, Mary Shelley, in this capacity, becomes a literateur. We extend to a literateur a little bit of grace, because we understand that if you're, for example, I am giving you, let me think here. I am giving you a story about a man who is reclaiming his life, a man who had shut himself off from the world and is reemerging from a life of isolation. While he was in isolation, one of the things that he liked to do was to watch birds. So, if in this story I give you a 10-page explanation about one morning, that man watching a hummingbird out of his window that ends up landing on a ledge with a bunch of blue jays, and they're just there until they all decide to fly off, you understand that that is a symbol, right? So, the stories that are relayed by Elizabeth in this chapter, like I said, I don't remember at this point if they do reflect on, or if they do reflect on the story, or if any of these characters come back. I just don't remember right now. If they do, then that is a symbol for the novel rather than just storytelling. The second thing here, now, I have to commend cojones when we see them. Pause. But on page 68 of my novel here, which is the penultimate page in the chapter, we get this sentence. We passed a fortnight of these perambulations. My health and spirits had long been restored, and they gained additional strength from the salubrious air I breathed and the natural incidents of our progress and the conversation of my friends. I dare you. I double dog dare you. Use the words perambulations and salubrious in the same sentence. You can't do it. Can't be done, not in today's world. So the fact that Mary Shelley was able to sneak those words into the same sentence, I think that those sorts of things are always worth pointing out and commending when we have them. And they do not, interestingly, they do not seem to be, they are not strange when we hear them. They fit into her general parlance.